Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joe, I'm one of your hosts. With me as always is the other edifying host.
Brian, hi.
How are you doing, Brian? Welcome back.
Grand, I've never edified you in your life.
Well, we have about 45 minutes here, there's still time.
No.
So it's been a week since we recorded an episode of the podcast, and subsequently I do not remember a single thing.
Oh, about Buffy?
About how this works, about what we do. So I'm pretty certain I started off by saying that this week we're going to be talking about the season 5 opener, season 5 episode 1, Buffy Viz Dracula. And Brian, I genuinely am like, how does this usually work? Can you want to start us off with a little amuse-bouche, a little Buffy and summary of the episode we're about to discuss?
A little amuse-bouffe. So this was, okay, well my notes say written by David Solomon and directed by Marty Noxon, but I know that to not be true. Past Brian's a fucking idiot.
That's analysis there.
Yeah, so this was directed by David Solomon, who last directed Where the Wild Things Are, and it was written by Marty Noxon, who last wrote New Moon Rising, first aired on September 26th, 2000, and it is season 5 episode 1. And here is your Buffy on summary. Dracula arrives and seduces Buffy into letting him bite her. His mind tricks turn Xander into his bug-eating servant who delivers Buffy to him. Giles and Riley raid Dracula's castle, and Giles is groped by his brides. After tasting Dracula's blood, Buffy fights free and stakes him. He repeatedly reforms. At home, Buffy has suddenly always had a sister, Dawn. That's my favourite line from any of these so far.
It's like these were made for Dawn arriving. You know, they've reached their point of
yeah, no, truly.
So in terms of Buffy, so I think getting back into the groove, reopening opening night at the Bronze Banter. A couple of things we wanted to chat about, recommend, which we've been enjoying, which are on the lighter side of things. And start off with is a little show called Taskmaster.
Yeah, we're watching a bunch of Taskmaster. Really disgustingly, the reason we got onto it was because of another podcast.
Yeah.
Filthy, disgusting content there.
Intermingling. So it's
our good friends over at Wonderful, Griffin McElroy and his wife, whose name I do not know.
Rachel.
I've never listened to
wife is a traditional term.
I've never listened to that podcast. So
you absolutely have listened to it.
No, I haven't. You told me to. I didn't.
Okay, fair enough. But yes, bizarrely, they in hearing this podcast, they recommended what is a very UK based show, so closer to us in terms of our wheelhouse, I think. And a hard sell, I think, initially in terms of watching it, because it's very, if anyone's familiar with the UK television network, it's very Dave, which is very kind of laggish game shows repeated ad nauseum. It's all about comedians, which Brian is famously disgusted by. But essentially the premise of it is that it's actually quite straightforward in some ways. You have five people, all comedians, who are set a series of seemingly simple tasks, and that task might be eat as much watermelon as possible in 1 minute. Or, Brian, what's another example of a task?
Well, your example from the first episode is get as much water out of this bath as you can without unplugging it or breaking the bath.
Mm-hmm. And they're set these tasks months in advance, separately for the most part, and then brought together to see the results, and are then judged by the Taskmaster on how well they have achieved this. And it is a simple premise which is catalyzed by the level of A, lateral thinking, and unexpected behaviour, but B, genuine Stockholm syndrome like insanity that comes out of some of these participants. It's unscripted, and we have, I think, to speak to its quality, blown through now nearly seven seasons of it in a relatively short period of time. And I think it's also shown me and Brian as surprising as it may be, something new about each other in terms of how we each will approach these tasks.
Your reaction to every single you think this is very funny. It's not. I'm like, oh, genuinely, Joel, how would you figure out this task? Well, how would you solve it? And my reaction is usually like, I would simply, they're like, carry as many beach balls as possible. I'd be like, deflate them, put them in your mouth. And you're like, I would simply take out my dick.
Well, I think it's a joke which builds over time. And
but you see, it wasn't funny the first time. It wasn't funny the second time. It wasn't funny the 50th time. It wasn't funny the 100th time. It was 150th charm.
But when you are guffawing with laughter at the 150th attempt, then it's really going to feel like you've invested in something. It's more intellectual, it's more cerebral humor than maybe you're used to, Brian. It's kind of a long form commentary on the genre.
You know what they say about comedy is trying the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results.
That's what they say, is it?
About comedy specifically, yeah.
But it's very good, and I think crucially, all of it, or the vast majority of it, is actually officially on YouTube.
Yeah, it is.
And very well presented, and yeah, it is something. So it's one I think I would definitely recommend, because it's something quintessentially that kind of UK brand of humor, which is kind of hard to translate because it's often about embarrassment, but not in like a large dramatic sense, more in a quiet kind of this almost could happen to you sense. That's incredibly cringy.
Yeah, I mean, I think American comedians are all about like bigger than life and explosive, extreme stuff, and British comedians are generally
people dying inside. Really is kind of what it is. Yeah,
you know the thing about like, you know, the sad clown, and you know, like when you tell people that, like, you know, comedians are actually very depressed always, and you say this to Americans and they're like, really? Jerry Seinfeld is really depressed? Who would have thought? And when you say it about British comedians, it's like, no, of course, that man's clearly dying inside.
Yeah.
Look at Dylan Moore, and he's like, he's died many times.
No, he is definitely Irish.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
The other thing we were watching in the last couple of weeks was Umbrella Academy, which was, we watched like half of season 1 when it came out last year. Thought it was grand, I think. Very atmospheric and very fun premise. It's based on the comic books by Gerard Way, who is from My Chemical Romance, who I have never not referred to as Gerald Way for whatever reason. Yeah. I must think he has some sort of game going on or something. But he, but the comic book, the TV show, it's on Netflix. Ellen Page stars in it, and yeah, season 1, kind of a mess,
a little clunky at times.
Towards the end of the season, though, was very enjoyable, we found. And then season 2, which came out last Friday, was a total pleasure.
Yeah, setting and tonal shift, a tightening of story, more focused on queer content, more focused on settling into the characters, and yeah,
watching the characters interact, importantly, which is a really that's the fun. Yeah,
it's very colourful. It's a very interesting example of how you can take very tropic situations, very stereotypical situations, a superpowered family with a dysfunctional background, etc., and make it interesting. It has what I think is the best qualities that Gerard Way brings to My Chemical Romance, in terms of that kind of pop punky, kind of high energy, but not necessarily hostile writing and pacing. Great music. I think you've been of the opinion throughout.
Needle drops were great. Yeah, and the Gerard Way thing is definitely like, oh, it's goth, but it's not. It's pop music.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, for the number of characters in the ensemble cast, actually a lot of likable characters.
Yeah.
It's very few people are like, oh, they're on screen again. And yeah, it's a nice breezy watch. So I think, and obviously if you watch it now, you're kind of on the pulse of a recent release as well, if you catch up to it. So yeah, absolutely would recommend that.
Which all of you people listening to Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast in the year 2020 love being really topical what you're watching. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's what I just said, so that's a segue. In
terms of a topical segue from Buffy the Vampire Slayer to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So yeah, as you edifyingly summarised, this episode is the opener for season 5. We've left our childish things of college and the initiative behind us to a large degree, and it's a very self-contained, very light episode in terms of basically the Dracula, Vlad Tepes, comes to town, has heard of the Slayer, and confronts her, and we kind of have a lot of clash between the very specifically non-Dracula-esque modern vampire that Buffy has always championed in his writing, with these really buried in the public consciousness tropes around Dracula, and it is throughout mostly a farce, I think.
I think there's definitely a level of this episode that just is lost to me, having not read Dracula at any point. You've read Dracula, I want to say?
I have read Dracula. I would say you haven't lost much, insofar as this draws more on the common understanding of Dracula than anything specific to the novel. And as Dracula purists will often point out that a lot of what Dracula can do in the common understanding isn't in the novel, what is in the novel, etc., isn't in the portrayals. But if you've seen Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, if you've seen Dead and Loving It, which is
I don't know that one.
It's a Leslie Nielsen Dracula film, which is I loved as a kid, but I think maybe doesn't actually stand up. It's a pastiche of the Francis Ford Coppola Bram Stoker's Dracula film, which I was always told was
a masterpiece.
A masterpiece, and I think they win a number of Oscars. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think they're wrong about
Okay,
that.
it just has a star-studded cast then, but like I watched it and I was like, this is a fascinating thing to watch, but it is long and I'm not getting it.
Yeah, we watched it recently a couple of months ago with our friend Ronan, who
was it only a couple of months ago?
Well,
It was pre-quarantine.
it was certainly pre-quarantine. I think it was like before Christmas.
Yeah.
But it was with our friend Ronan and a bunch of other people. And Ronan is a absolute, like, I don't know if there's words to describe how insanely obsessed he is with Dracula.
He is an expert on Dracula.
Yeah,
put
so
it lightly in that way.
the running commentary while watching that movie was like more informative than if you had sat Francis Ford Coppola down beside you to talk about it, and potentially Bram Stoker.
Yeah,
it was incredible.
he'll be spinning off onto his podcast, Dracula's Droogs. Droogs.
Very good. For the rare person who likes Dracula and Clockwork Orange.
Oh, that can't be that rare of a person.
True.
That's definitely someone who has like a Godfather poster on their wall as well.
Oh gosh. Okay, so yeah, this episode was a lot of fun. It's such okay. One thing to start, Joe. What are your expectations, remembrances, emotions around season 5?
Obviously, Glory, Dawn, mental illness, the Slayer under pressure, kind of with kind of dark, morally ambiguous, and many times quite, unsupernaturally grim scenarios. Emotional turmoil. Am I?
Oh no! Sorry, I'm not. This isn't a yes.
No, but like, I'm basically what you're saying is that very little of that is present in this. This doesn't really set. In many ways, this episode does not set a tone for the season.
Oh sure, no. This is more just generally. I was asking about like and what do you expect to give the season out of 10 rating wise?
Okay, what do I expect to give the season out of 10? I'm going to say probably a 9.
Yeah, my thought too.
Because I feel and I've mentioned this on the podcast before, my actual recollection of when I watched Buffy in order is very muddled. I'm not a very chronological memory person in that way, but I feel like that everything up until definitely season 3, early season 4 was very formative and fundamental for me, and everything after that was a bit kind of, as I started drifting away a little bit or not watching it as frequently or whatever at the time. So I don't think I would have appreciated season 5 in its fullness in terms of its, the maturity it has, in terms of the, I think, really exceptional acting, I think, in this season, particularly later on in many ways. And I think coming back to it now, I think I will probably rate this a lot higher in my internal kind of power ranking. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
I think the metaphor and the theme of Buffy kind of coming into maturity, accepting, as we see in this episode, kind of where she fits with Giles and where she fits with other people in her group, and then realizing that the gift she gives doesn't have to be death in terms of like murder, it can be sacrifice.
Yep.
Is really powerful, and I can see that being very effective for me.
Yeah, absolutely, it's good. I think my strongest memories of this show growing up are of season 5. So I'm excited to rewatch it really with a bit of a critical eye, because I think the later 3 seasons get a lot less critical attention, a lot less analysis, which is probably appropriate for season 6 and 7. 6 is like such a dark horse of the show, and season 7 is it's just very drawn out realistically. So yeah, I'm kind of excited to see what it's like to watch it now, and reinspect its metaphors and its approach, and it's I quite like the season tonally, much more so than season 4. Season 4 felt very transitional and very like unsure of itself, where season 5 I feel like has a very bold voice and very distinct big bad, and big bad who I really really like. I love Glory. I think she's great.
Yeah, I think and obviously we'll get into this in greater detail, but as a counterpoint, because we say all the best big bags have something that negate or counterpoint Buffy's powers, be it a dark mirror in terms of faith, be it the way Angel is obviously a counter to her, even the way the Master was able to keep up with her verbally and all that kind of stuff. Glory is probably one of the perfect examples of like what if Buffy was actually mirroring something which was the other side of the darkness that she shares. And I always found little old impressionable nerdy me, but the fact that she is not a demon, she is a hell god, as like that as a threat, I viscerally understand this feeling of Buffy being outclassed by this, and then having to run and deal with it in some way is very fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We'll obviously discuss that more as it goes on. But this episode as an opener for the season, just like bizarre. I think has a couple of purposes. The first is to really throw a curveball at the end of the episode. So as a fan, as an astute viewer of Buffy, you're watching this episode and you're thinking, okay, so if you look at previous season 1 episodes, like the Freshman is about really coming to Buffy really coming to grips with.
You mean first episode of a season kind of thing?
Yeah. So Buffy coming to grips with kind of her new position in the college, feeling like a big fish in a big pond, or a medium fish in a big pond kind of thing, and getting her realizing that her confidence is what allows her to beat vampires in a lot of situations, and having Sunday, or whatever her name was. It was Sunday, right? Yeah,
you're actually right. It was Sunday. I did call her Friday earlier today, and I was wrong.
Beating the shit out of her. Season 3 was Anne, which was just like a stunning episode where she was brought back into a situation, and then season 2 was When She Was Bad, which really set the tone for the season in terms of Buffy really discovering something about herself and trying to flex her adulting kind of muscles. I'm never going to use that word
there's
again.
a phrase we can put in the grave, absolutely.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. Anyway, so this one is I really think as an episode, first of all, it serves to have a bit of fluffiness after a reasonably dark and odd season 4 closer.
Heavy and tangled and involved last few episodes.
So I mean, like if you look at like Restless to this episode, like it's much it's just bizarre. But yes, and then having the punch at the end of it being like, and Buffy has a sister, like I think that's a really odd like bait and switch. And like quite effective. Did you know this, Gabe? Apparently in Australia, this episode was aired as the season 4 finale.
I think I've heard this before. Yeah.
And so this like basically the Australian viewers were like, excuse me, what the fuck?
Yeah.
For like months waiting to see like who Buffy's sister was.
Yeah.
Just bizarre. This is pre the internet when you could like just like download a show. I remember when I first watched Grey's Anatomy when I was about 15, it was still in the era of, Ireland got TV shows 6 months to a year later after the States. The same would have been the case for Buffy. But I remember when I was like watching Grey's Anatomy, it was the first time I started torrenting things while I was like watching through them. And I was like,
legally, wait. I presume, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like watching, I had been watching on TV and I was like, wait, you're telling me that I can just get an entire season worth of content right now? And I was like, I will do that then.
And yet, like 5 years later, when we met, we were still like, bringing a laptop out to your parents' house to maybe, get a crumb of like internet, like for like a couple of episodes of something once a week.
Exactly. So, very odd episode. It gives the characters a little bit of space as well to just be kind of young. Yeah,
and do you know what I think? It establishes is that these characters now, they still have character development and they still have all that, but they kind of have reached a point of certain plateau where these are the people that they are who will go through events as opposed to changing in some fundamental way. Which is why I think it's interesting that this is a very in media res first episode. Usually the first episode is either Buffy has left or has come back, but there's a very distinct summer period has passed. That's kind of the trope they've had. And she's in bed with Riley. Everyone's kind of hanging out. Like, yes, time has passed, but there's not as much of a sense of like that in-universe season break.
Yeah.
And I think that the opener for this, where it's just wordlessly she's restless in bed with Riley. Gets up.
Did you feel like she was like dissatisfied to some degree with Riley there, that she was just bored, or like, or so what I read that as is like she has these like dark urges essentially in her, which is the killer of the Slayer inside her basically.
So essentially in terms of the opening, like she gets out of bed with Riley, she goes and kills the vampire. And goes back to bed and is able to sleep then, and that's it. And then that's the teaser and then the credits. So I think in terms of the season opener, an opening scene, it's quite atypical so far. And I suppose like, well, half my brain was like, what is the deeper meaning of this? And the other half was like, well, sometimes you feel like getting up and going for a run if you can't sleep, so maybe that's just what it's like for Buffy. But I don't think that. I think what we
sorry, I said but no, I do not.
You've heard the concept of
that
it.
That is not an experience I've ever had. Can't sleep. Shall I just get up and go for a fucking run?
Yeah, you can tire yourself out.
Most people aren't psychopaths.
What about Nate Fisher? But I think you're right in the sense that we're seeing continuity here in her life, and often people who have frequent change in the way that she does actually are quite unsettled, instability, and which is what we saw with Faith as well to a very extreme degree. So I think she is feeling like a bit maybe boxed in to a certain degree.
No doubt. So one of the interesting aspects of the episode, obviously the big dawn, it really dawns on them that Buffy has a bit of a sister.
A bit of a sister, that's quite an accurate portrayal.
This metaphysical change happens in the episode in a really interesting way, because there's a conversation that Joyce has with Buffy when they're having dinner, and she says, when you go back to college, this place is going to be so quiet without you.
Yeah.
So it's very much establishing for the viewers that no, Dawn is not here by this point. And when Buffy goes into her bedroom at the end of the episode, finds Dawn and says, "What are you doing here?" So that's obviously happened at some point during the episode, which is kind of fascinating.
I love it.
It's great writing, I think, because what the fuck were the message boards like for that? For that week.
I'll be brave and I'll come out and say that when I watched that episode, I was just like, I don't remember Buffy having a sister. Strange.
Yeah.
But it did take a while for it to click for me that she hadn't been there before.
I'm not looking forward to next week, because next week's episode, I can't remember what it's called actually, but it's the episode, but it's the episode where Dawn is portrayed like a 12-year-old, whereas she's portrayed as a 15-year-old for the rest of the show. So obviously
we'll talk about this, but initially, I think she was picked as a younger sibling, as in as a 12-year-old. Her initial episode I think was written from a more juvenile perspective, and then was aged up when Michelle Trachtenberg was brought on. So if we get that right now, Trachtenberg,
it's German, so whatever way.
Yeah, true. I was always a big fan of her and Harriet the Spy. So
me too. I watched Harriet the Spy for the first time when I was like 20, but I really liked it when I was 20. Rosie O'Donnell's in it.
It's very emotional.
It is, yeah.
So in terms of the episode, I kind of had a recollection of this as like a bit of like camp nonsense. I actually thought it was quite good. In terms of it really laid out its premise in the sense of allowing the character space to be silly. I think Xander as Dracula's Renfield, manservant type character, I think this is some of the best work Nicholas Brendan has done on the show.
The moment where he puts the spider into his mouth, and there's no spider in his hand while there's no prop or anything. Yeah. He just moves his hand up to his mouth and chews emphatically. Yeah. It was genuinely funny and genuinely good work.
It's like this is what Xander was made for, being someone's subservient bitch essentially.
Except in a non-gendered, non-misogynistic.
Exactly, in the common parlance. And the fact that through every other scene he has, he's quite clearly evil, as in on Dracula's side, and just no one pays any attention to what he's saying.
It's good writing.
Another one of those weird puerile jokes he gets as well, where at one point he calls Dracula the Dark Master, and then says beggar, as a masturbator. And then a follow-up joke where he's like the evil prince beggar. it's just stupid, but I appreciate that the show this is something that's said a lot about a lot of things, but I actually mean here that it doesn't take itself too seriously. We don't have to make these characters look particularly clever all the time.
No, absolutely. It's It's a good fun one. I do like it. I think one of the best things about the episode is that while Dracula is such a central aspect of it, it does take the backseat. He does take the backseat to the gang interactions and the gang like reintroducing themselves for a new season and establishing the patterns. Everything about Dracula is kind of nothing. You know, what do we learn about him? He turns into bats, and that's kind of stupid. He turns into a wolf, and that's kind of stupid.
He turns into mist.
He turns into mist. It's kind of stupid. And he seduces Buffy.
Yeah. They
fully have sex, right?
I feel like if that was 100% canonical, she would have to deal with that with Riley. But I think when you have Dracula and you allow him to bite you, that is essentially a sexual exchange you've had with him. It's definitely more than, I don't know, Riley was kissed by Faith in Buffy's body, or like had sex with Faith in Buffy's body. But so I think it's a weird one because they position Dracula. And with the overall plot of the episode being that he has come to find the Slayer, he specifically says to her that you are as dark as I am. We're on a razor's edge on either side of the same coin, essentially, and does his whole Lucy Westerner thing with Buffy trying to seduce her and make her a vampire. But they keep him at the middle distance in the sense that they don't say that he is nobody. Mm-hmm. And they don't say that he is the father of all vampires. They're just like, he's a fairly old vampire who has been very good at maintaining his brand. And along the way has developed some, as Spike puts it, gypsy magic tricks. But some actually, to be fair, he might mean literally in the sense that, you know, in the ethnic group context there is but gypsy is a slur regardless.
Well,
sure, we talked about this when we talked about the Romani tribe with Angel. Is I think depending on the context it's used in, I think do you not agree that it was variable?
I think that was Eskimo that you're thinking of there.
No, specifically it was about gypsy as well.
You think there are some people who would consider themselves to be gypsies?
I have to check back over the tapes, but I think that what we came to an agreement through research on was that there are groups of people in those traveling communities who refer to themselves as gypsies. Sure. So if they if they're referring to themselves as many of the, say, Jenny Calendar, Wood Up, etc., that's one thing, and of course it can be used pejoratively.
And
as well.
I think the tone contributes hugely. As in, I think if it's a funny one because I think some people approach things like slurs or language like that as, you know, there's one aspect to it where research and consideration has to be contributed there, where you as a person need to realize that your words have meaning and that they have context and historical context. And when you use a word, you want to make sure that you're using it appropriately. But there's a different, and I think there's so rarely a contextual difference that people identify between people using that kind of phrase in this kind of situation where we're saying, not for Spike, but this kind of situation where we're talking about it versus how it can be flung at someone of the traveling community and the bitterness and stinging that can occur.
For me, when I'm saying gypsy in this context, I'm saying it with a capital G as a proper noun.
Oh no, absolutely.
But what I'm saying is interesting is I think as much as Spike is saying it in the same way that he says ponce or whatever, do you know what I mean? But there is actually a literal factuality to it, because obviously with Dracula coming from Transylvania, a lot of that setting is around what would have been the text being called gypsy communities at the time, so it's literal as well. They have developed it from his background. But they very much keep him at the middle distance insofar as, you know, he is definitely a vampire and a potentially interesting one in terms of how he's developed a brand, but as Spike said, has let a lot of the actual accurate vampire lore into the public knowledge, which is bagged for them, but he portrays none of the characteristics you would think of an elder vampire in the show in terms of the master or Kakistos or anything like that. So, and of course once he's used and kind of, you know, discarded by the show, he never appears again in any fashion
appropriately,
which I think is really interesting. It's in Buffy's world, Dracula's there. He's not uninteresting. He's just not particularly interesting.
Apparently one of the writing processes of this episode was that in the writer's room, they kept being like, okay, we need to have a really old vampire like Dracula. And they kept saying this, and Jocelyn was like, oh, well, Dracula is out of copyright. We can just
use Dracula.
And they're like, oh, yeah, great. Yes, all true. One of the interesting things I think in the episode for sure is Giles' stuff. So Giles at the beginning of the episode is talking to Willow. He has had her over the summer scanning all their library books and
a flatbed scanner.
And going through cataloguing all the amulets is what he says, or she says, And she's slagging him for this a little bit and saying, you know, I'd like to be out having fun. And he basically says, well, I want you to have all this to hand because I'm going to leave. I'm no longer Buffy's Slayer. Wait, Butcher. And
definitely not her Slayer.
And I'm going back to England. By the end of the episode, there's a really nice interaction with Buffy between Giles and Buffy, where Giles goes to tell Buffy that he's going to leave for England, and she says, I need your help to learn more about what I am. I love this approach that the season has to Slayerness, and in terms of, like, you know, at various points through this show, I think the Slayer as adult metaphor, it has been about the struggle to become an adult. And I think this season is about the struggle to identify what being an adult actually means. What being mature means, what growing means. And I think, you know, just like recognizing Buffy beginning to recognize the dark force within her, which sounds so ridiculous. And recognizing the power that she has gotten has not come from nowhere, and inspecting the origins of it is like, it's such a good season trope.
And there's a powerful metaphor there for understanding your history, understanding the forebears in your particular community that have led you to this point, and taking that, you know, not being shackled by it but catalyzing it into something new. And what I think is
I heard that Buffy threw the first brick at Stonewall.
I heard that a Slayer was the first person to die at Stonewall.
No, that's not fair. I heard a Slayer killed the first person at Stonewall.
True. What I like about the Buffy Giles relationship is it is a challenging one to evolve if you want your main character to get older and to not remain infantilized to a certain degree. Like, she's not a 16-year-old who doesn't want to die anymore kind of thing. But
she's a 20-year-old and she does want to die.
Yeah, 20-year-old who will die.
21 actually.
But with Giles, I don't think any other Watcher could take her the distance either, because they're mostly mechanically focused. You need to know how to punch and stab and slay and kick and all that kind of stuff. And you need to know your history insofar as you're learning battle techniques and weak points and all that.
And, like, you know, potential mystical events that will cause apocalypses.
Yeah, exactly. And Buffy is becoming an elder statesperson of the Slayer line, in the sense of, you know, something that rises above the job.
Slayers aren't really supposed to, like, live this long, if nothing else, you know?
And as we've often said, that the challenge she runs up against with the council, and the challenge the council has, is they're not meant to live this long and think this much about where it comes from. And as we find, in many ways, it's because it comes from the Watchers Council doing something terrible.
Yeah.
And that, again, the actual specific event of what the Watchers did is not in itself interesting, because that is just a prism through which we mean what all Watchers do to all Slayers in all contexts. And with someone like Giles, who has all that knowledge and background, but is 100% almost unerringly on the right side of the conversation about, you know, that's a very exciting pairing.
Yeah.
Because they really are looking to do something new in terms of, you know, how we approach the, you know, what Buffy and Angel often show it as, like a never-ending battle, a back and forth that is only ever comes in waves, as opposed to having a final point. It takes an adult Slayer to understand that, rather than thinking there is a single doomsday, we will stop and that will be it. She understands it's an ongoing thing, which I think is really interesting.
Absolutely. Okay. Do you have any other, like, episode specific points that aren't Buffy bits?
Oh gosh, I enjoy Giles being in the pit with the three sisters.
Oh, that was good.
Falling over him.
I believe that's the only time he gets bit on the show.
Yes, absolutely. And he says as well, well done, Giles, at least you didn't get knocked out again. So all this kind of stuff could read as cringy Fang references and megatextual stuff, or even like Xander in this episode being like, I'm always the guy who gets the funny syphilis, and basically the guy who gets shit on all the time.
Yeah,
which is true. Yeah. But I think it's very kindly handled. So yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought Riley is in a difficult position in this episode in terms of having any value to the show, you know, beyond,
like, is he here really?
Yeah, so he's developing some kind of a weird rivalry with Spike, or frustration with him. So yeah, I thought it pulled together all the threads of the show so far in an interesting way, as in like a more comfortable season opener than the freshman, for sure.
It felt like almost like they're presenting as like, you know, here's the finished show, and what you can expect for the rest is monsters of the week. And at the end of the episode, pulling the twist of like, no, there's a thing.
Yeah, like, let's not underplay. It's a great twist. the Dawn thing is great. It's really like, what the hell?
I can't and Dawn will be the worst character of the season. Like, absolutely, she's gonna be on my entry for that at the end of the season when we do our, what do we call it? Our
hit list.
Season
Smackdown.
Season Smackdown. What a great call.
I know who the worst character is in the season.
Oh, who?
I don't like Ben.
Oh,
I do not like Ben.
I like Ben because I think he represents a very interesting moral dilemma in the situation where he's like essentially an onlooker, you know. Anyway, but I think Dawn's character is just atrocious in so many ways, but I think it's such a fascinating facet of the show, and it brings out a brilliant bunch of expressions in Buffy.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Do you have any interesting Buffy bits there, Joe?
Yeah, we noticed in the beach scene that potentially Sarah Michelle Gellar has a heart tattoo on her shoulder.
Yeah, we did notice that.
A little cute little one over her right shoulder.
I thought it was a flower, actually. But
maybe it was a flower. It was something like flower, like a rose or a heart or something. And there's no production notes we could find to reference it, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Buffy tattoo, flop big scanner. I did notice that Michelle Trachtenberg is like noted in the opening cast credits, and it just kind of slips under the radar because usually you hide that stuff. In this week's episode of Angel, they hide Eliza Dushku's appearance until the end credits and all that.
Yeah.
But I just thought that was funny how it's kind of slipped straight in.
Well, I mean, like, there's no, if you're watching that, you're just like, okay, there's going to be someone called Michelle Trachtenberg at some point in this episode, and that's just like not really a thing for you, you know.
I did enjoy when Xander tries to confront Riley. Riley just decks him, but like really broke his nose. Like it was actually one of the most hardest seeming punches I've ever seen on a television show.
It was unpleasant. So apparently Michelle Trachtenberg worked with Sarah Michelle Gellar on All My Children previously, and Sarah specifically recommended Michelle Trachtenberg for this, presumably because they got on well and they could portray a sister relationship quite like naturally, and I think they do. Their sister dynamics and chemistry is there.
Yeah.
They feel like they hate each other until they love each other, which is that must be nice. Emma Caulfield is added to the opening credits in this episode, which is nice. And this is the only episode from now until the end of the show where Michelle Trachtenberg isn't included as a main character in the main credits. She appears as a guest actor in this episode, but from this point onwards, she'll be the main cast.
Does she appear in the visual credits? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I believe so. Anyway. So
I did note that with this season they're now splicing together footage from the 4 previous seasons, including this one, and like there's a real shot-to-shot disparity in the quality of the footage that they've chosen to use, which is very odd. And Sarah Michelle Gellar now has 2 new stunt doubles from this episode onward. So Sophia Crawford, who had previously done it, who was bitten by Angel in that episode, goodbye to her. You did a great job. I thought you were saying that's why she wasn't doing it anymore.
The other thing I would just want to note, Mark Field about this episode says that usually Dracula as a metaphor represents unrepressed sexual desire. And in this episode, Buffy isn't seduced by his sexual offerings. You know, it's not that he represents as like sexual freedom. Instead, he offers knowledge of what the Slayer is, the dark...
sexy knowledge,
the dark sexy knowledge, essentially, and that's what she's seduced by, and that's an interesting interpretation. Okay, fashion. My God, what the fuck is Xander fucking wearing?
Xander's shirt was horrible enough to start off with. It's like an Island Time swirly bowling shirt monstrosity, but when he moves, it's embedded with what you said to me weren't rhinestones, but with something which makes him glitter like a disco ball when he moves.
So rhinestones are like, you know, those kind of like studs that you see on like chokers and stuff. Yeah, the metal studs, like the ones that are kind of like look like little pyramids.
Sure, but they shine, don't they?
You can get shiny rhinestones. So these would be I'm not sure what they're
shine stones.
No, they're sequins. They're sequins.
Maybe they are sequins, actually. Yeah,
they're specific sequins.
It's really awful.
It is.
And Dracula looks terrible. Dracula looks like an incel with a thirsty wig throughout the whole episode. For
sure. Yeah. Like he's wearing a red shirt and a black waistcoat, which doesn't fit him. No, and he just looks like every incel. If you gave him a fedora you'd be like, yeah,
He
right.
looks like someone who has dressed themselves from pennies for their secondary school debs.
Yeah. Whenever Sarah Michelle Gellar wears her scarves to hide her illicit affairs with vampires, she always just looks so ridiculous. Like no one actually wears a scarf like that. Just wear anything else.
Yeah, it's not a scarf. Like it is a scarf. It's like a neckerchief kind of thing. Yeah. It's like no sane person who's not been bitten by a vampire has ever worn this.
Do you think she specifically got hired to do Scooby-Doo because of these scenes?
Yeah.
And yeah, otherwise there are some weirdly normal clothing choices in this episode. Otherwise, that aren't Xander. Just like people look like they're wearing slightly more modern clothes, which is weird. Mm-hmm. But yeah, fair. Yeah, okay. One of my notes here is that Buffy is not a trans furry, which I refuse to explain. So death count in this episode. Do you have that for us, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely.
He lied.
So yeah, in this episode we have 2 vampires who were staked by Buffy on patrol, and the 2 moving people who are killed by Dracula or are implied to be killed when they deliver his box of Transylvanian dirt.
All right.
Arguably, yeah, I don't know if it's meant to be presented that Buffy does actually permanently like kill Dracula. I don't think he is killed. He's not listed as a death, but he just never ever comes back again.
Yeah.
Except
I don't want to talk about that.
He is featured extensively in the comics and has a very close to sexual relationship with Xander, and also becomes part of the Second Council of Magic.
Wow. Okay. So we're never talking about any of that again. Joel, what rating? Oh yeah, what rating out of 10 would you give this?
I would give this episode 8.8.
What?
What were you expecting?
8.8.
What were you expecting?
That's a lot.
Okay,
Holy moly.
let me think again.
No. You've committed. You've committed.
No,
you've committed.
Let me think again. I will give this episode 8.8 topless Giles's.
Okay.
Which might be generous.
It's actually topless as Giles.
Yeah. I just really enjoyed it. I feel like I've shook off some of the quarantine weight of the season 4 clunkier episodes. Do you know what I mean? Some of the mire of like the initiative stuff, and like
was the entirety of season 4 recorded by us in quarantine?
There's actually no way to know.
Yeah, true.
There's actually no way to know. But it I thought it felt very competent. I thought it had the highest density of character voices just being on point in a long time. And it was better than I remembered. And I had a lot of fun watching it. And Buffy at the end of the day, for me, is best when it's fun. So yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm going to give it a nice generous dollop of 8.8 topless as Giles.
That's very, very, very topless. Yeah, so I think I'm going to give it 8.0, and I thought I was being generous, giving it 8. 8.0, giving up men's out of 10. Mm-hmm. As Joyce so kindly says to the 2 lesbians in front of her. I thought it was actually very good fun. Maybe it's the weakest season opener yet, but like the least thematic, but I appreciate what it's doing, and I do like a nice, enjoyable, fun, fluffy episode.
Absolutely.
Okay. Should we move on to the chase? I cannot remember the name of this episode. We watched it last night.
Judgment.
Okay.
So yeah, season 2 opener of Angel.
It was grand.
It was good. I actually thought it was good. I enjoyed it. So kind of interesting, I think, from a televisual point of view, because they need to re-establish the show as you often do with younger seasons of a television show. They very much, the opening scenes are a casual way to the potential new network viewers to be like, this is what the show is about. He's a vampire. They help the helpless. This is kind of how the episode flows. The premise of this particular one on an interpersonal level is Angel dealing with the revelation that if he defeats his final apocalypse, he will potentially become human. He will Shanshu, and being very happy with this, and then having to deal with the moral quandary of the fact that due to one of Cordelia's visions, he kills a demon, a prior Motu demon, who seems to be menacing a pregnant woman, but was in fact her champion.
Yeah.
And was meant to present her before a tribunal who will, if successful, protect her child, who's meant to be a foretold savior figure. Mm-hmm. And it's all about how he's a hypocrite, basically. He assumed that, well, a demon must be evil. How could anyone who was a demon ever do something good? And then be like, that's me.
Yeah.
If I could look in the mirror, I would see my reflection. And yeah, so it introduces a few elements there. It has a soft introduction of the Hyperion Hotel, which becomes their base of operations until season 5. It has
kind of, it's not too much of a base of operations in season 5. Oh, sorry, until the beginning of season 5.
Yes, until season 5 rolls around, yeah. But probably the iconic HQ of the show.
Yeah, I would say so.
And I actually think a great piece of set choice. But anyway, they introduced the demon sanctuary bar called Caritas, which is the Latin for mercy, which is hosted by a character who played by Andy Hallett, who will come to be known as Lauren, but initially is called the host.
Yeah, and who died very young, unfortunately.
Died with a heart condition a few years ago, I think. And in the show, his role is he hears people sing karaoke and he can empathically read them and predict things for them. And he eventually becomes a main part of the cast, and so it was one of the last cast members or main cast members to be added.
The last being Fred.
Yeah. Yes, I enjoyed it. I thought that definitely some of the crunchier parts of the early season one are not present in here. No. It didn't drag terribly. Any scene with Gung in it still reads very badly. Like he goes to find Cordelia and Wesley and knocks on the door and says, it's Gung, and they're like, oh, he's got a gun. And then when he comes in, it's like, that must be your street name, brother. And it's just not.
It's not okay.
It's not good. No.
Christina Machado, Machado, Machado. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. Isn't it? Who plays one of the main characters in 6 Feet Under, Vanessa, who is Rico's wife,
and also the mother in One Day at a Time.
Yeah, which is if you haven't watched, one of the best sitcoms of recent years. Wonderful.
And she's exceptional. She is far and away one of the best guest actors that's been on Buffy and Angel in terms of that. She easily could have been a recurring character. She, in her few scenes with Angel, I feel like outdoes him verbally. Do you know what I mean?
Establish herself so quickly as a really good character.
I just think she's incredibly watchable, incredibly charming. And yeah, so we have all that kind of establishing and then re-establishing their mission. Angel gets some good fight scenes in. He's on a horse at one point, doing some jousting in the LA streets. And we have David Boreanaz is allowed to do quite a bit of his stuff that he likes to do. The initial episode where he's talking about potentially if he's human, how they could go, I can't remember what he talked about, like go tanning or something, or go down to the beach.
I can't remember what it was,
but he's very cheerful and effervescent because he thinks he's going to be human. And then the clincher of the episode being that at a moment of great distress and import, he decides that he has to sing karaoke to allow the host to tell him where the woman has gone to, and he sings Barry Manilow's Mandy. Not well. No. It is excruciating. It is hilarious. They clearly thought so as well, because the credit sequence is just filled with Dave Boreanaz doing different bits of karaoke
and corpsing entirely. But it's very good. And also, I think, funnily enough, one thing they noted is that when Lauren becomes a main character, they massively scale back what his abilities allow him to do. Because in this, even though Angel barely knows the woman he's looking for, Lauren's like, she's going to be here at this time doing this, and that would just make almost all plot issues irrelevant in future. Between him and Cordelia,
and then the capper of the episode at the end is Angel kind of realizing that it's kind of one soul at a time, but that the fight is going well, and he feels like he's making progress, and goes to prison to visit Faith. And they have what I think is actually a very well written, a very charismatic, and a very good chemistry conversation about kind of like, this is the work, so all of that I thought was quite charming.
It was a good episode.
Was there else I was going to say?
That's pretty it. Darla's there a little bit.
Darla is there a little bit, but that's just kind of slow burn for the rest of the season. But I do think that Julie Benz, whose character was not much when she was alive in Buffy, and was definitely developed in flashbacks, I think she comes at this with like ready to like do an arc, which I really appreciate. So I'd probably give it personally 7 failed feminist gestures out of 10.
I was going for 7 failed feminist gestures out of 10 as well. I have no complaints about it whatsoever. It dragged a little tiny bit for me, but overall very good fun. The scene in the gym was quite funny, again, an incredibly well lit episode for what is supposed to be a very dark show.
And like, I understand the point they make in that gym scene, but like, it is brave to put your vampire character in a room which is entirely mirrors and hope that you're not going to catch a reflection of production crew, which they did.
Yeah, of course they did. Okay, great. Should we wrap up there, Joe?
Yeah, welcome back to the fold, folks. So we will leave it there for this week for this episode of Buffy Boys. We hope you enjoy it. We hope you're keeping well. If you did, please let us know. It really makes our day. And otherwise, tell your friends and tell your Dark Princess of the Night, and recommend that they watch Buffy Boys.
Baiters.
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Oh. Okay, see you.
Cheers.